Well, thank you for that warm welcome, which I so richly deserve, but so seldom get. I have flapped my gums in 65 countries on 6 continents, but one of the things I enjoy doing the most is being with the McPhee family. I've never met a more transparent set of people with that much wisdom encapsulated, generationally displayed. So it's actually my joy and privilege to be here more than anything else. I landed, as the introduction said, in America in 1986 with $9 in my pocket. We grew up poor. And the question always is, how poor were you? We were so poor we'd go to Kentucky Fried Chicken, lick other people's fingers. We didn't have tracks to be on the other side off, but we did have running water. If you needed it, you ran and got it. And that's not reasonably far from the truth. My mother did marry my dad when she was 14. She was betrothed to him, had an 8th grade education. My father studied under a streetlight to graduate from college because his parents couldn't afford electricity, and that's the truth. But 2 years ago, at the age of 75, my mother got her master's degree. Last year, at the age of 84, my dad got his PhD. So now that you have ascertained that I come from a family of very slow learners, we're going to try to engage ourselves. My goal is to flap my gums for about $1.30, about an hour and a half, open it up for some questions, some comments, maybe even some snide remarks. I'm a social anthropologist in that I connect the dots of human history. My style of motivation is very different. I gauge behavior and culture, tradition and opportunity, but I challenge the very stereotypes that exist. Some of the things I say may seem politically incorrect, but they will be well researched. I guarantee you one thing. But if you disagree with anything I say, just slap the person next to you. We'll deal with it when we get to the break, okay? We are living in a very incredible time. The opportunities that exist have always existed. You have already learned the art of managing your money. You've learned the art of wealth management. You've heard from the experts. Now let's take a step back, as Michelle pointed out, when you go back into the confines of your own environment, when you're confronted with the reality of what you need to do with this information, and you now have to put yourself in charge, how do you rise to the challenge? Most people will stand in front of the mirror and say, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, do I have a prayer at all?" If the mirror ever looked back at you and said, "With that kind of hairdo, go back to bed, listen to the mirror." If you walk out in this world looking like the picture on your driver's license or like you've been weaned on a pickle, ain't nobody going to treat you like a glamour shot. So first step, if you're happy, tell your face. But see, happiness is linked to events. But joy is undiluted, it's unadulterated, it's pure. You can go through life being happy by participating in things, but you will never experience the fulfillment of what life was designed to be. Man was designed for accomplishment, engineered for success, and endowed with the seeds of greatness. 97% of the people in this world operate in the comfort zone. 3% of the people in this world operate in the effective zone. The difference between comfort and effectiveness is growth. Growth is uncomfortable. How then do you pressurize yourself to stand in front of the mirror and say, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, here I am, what's my call?" See, when I landed in America in 1986 and we watched that television for the first time, I told my bride, I said, "We're going to make it. These people think they have problems." How do you get into that 3%? How do you take the blinders off and begin to realize that you are at the geographic center of your achievement, of your universe? 7.2 billion will walk this planet during your lifetime. In all of ordained creation, there is not another just like you. You're unique in every attribute of human existence, which means you have already won. Why don't you give yourself permission to think uniquely? We all want to go with the flow. If you go with the flow, if you let someone else row your boat, they're going to take it to where they want to go, not where you want to go. I remember when I went to the Ziglar Corporation and said, I want to be a speaker and a trainer, the guy who looked at me, the image I portrayed did not match my expectation. So his judgment was based on what he saw, not what I felt. Hear me carefully. People's judgment of you is based on what they see, not what you feel. And if you cower to their perception, you will be a victim all of your life. The first attribute of achieving peak performance is this: make sure that you are fundamentally going to qualify yourself to challenge every assumption you have held dear from the day you were born. Whether it's a cultural assumption, whether it's a traditional assumption, whatever it is. How do you challenge those assumptions? You challenge the assumptions by asking yourself, what have you held dear? Michelle used the word non-negotiable. Some things are non-negotiable, but within the confines of tradition, there are some traditions we just hold on, even though they make no sense. And we do it in the name of being compliant. Quiz me this. America, greatest nation I know. I pledge to be a patriot of this nation. I've lived here for 30 years. It's the only country in the world where I can't figure out, where they make rules that make no sense. You go to a bank, the drive-through ATM has its keypad in Braille. Now, if you're trying to convince me in your desire to be decent that a blind dude is making a withdrawal or his dog's driving, I ain't buying it. And you should stop selling it. Hearing clinics advertise on the radio. You go to the bank, they chain the pen to the counter. When was the last time you heard in a robbery? 5th and Main, we had a robbery. They got away with the BIC, Bob. They got away with the BIC. Nobody steals that stupid pen. And yet we wander through this thing, meandering by following the lead of someone who is clueless. I remember I was standing at an airport behind a lady. She was a celebrity. She had already arrived. She was arguing about showing her ID in a post-9/11 world. Now, this is image 101. She was saying, don't you know who I am? I'm a celebrity. Why do you need my ID? The flight attendant said, I don't need your ID. It's the law. They went back and forth. I tapped her on the shoulder. I said, at Terminal 4 in Dallas, all of us celebrities have to show our ID. She said, who are you? I said, Gandhi. So, see, if someone has to tell you who you are, you ain't. Get off that high horse. Life is tough, but if you're tough on yourself, life will become infinitely easier on you. When I asked Zig Ziglar, the legend, the motivator, my hero, my spiritual father, and a man who taught me everything I probably know, when I asked him, I said, sir, what is the one thing I have to do to be able to do what you do? He says, challenge assumptions. He says, your accent is tricky. There's certain words you say that I cannot understand. Are you willing to go back and open a dictionary and find the buddies that would easily roll off your tongue? See, when I stood in the Georgia Dome in front of 35,000 people and I'd finally arrived, they put me between Rudy Giuliani and Jimmy Carter just to stop a fight. But that was true. I actually did speak. They were on either side of me. When I got into the limo, I had finally made it. The young immigrant with the clueless accent and the struggle had now spoken to 35,000 people in a standing ovation. I hugged my hero in the limo and I cried. Big gully washers. Thank you. You know what he said? Folks, genius has been described as the ability to focus on the task at hand. Even though I was lauding praise on him, he looked at me and he said, son, all I did was open one door, but I trained you so well you ran in looking for light switches. You want to achieve peak performance? Remember the light switches of all that they gave you yesterday and today. You may not be able to use them all in every encounter, but every one of those nuggets will help you in some encounter. All I did was open one door, but I trained you so well you ran in looking. So what is this law of this peak performance? It's an elusive plateau that encompasses both the visible and the invisible, both the external and the internal. It is the art of exhibiting that golden rule by learning why and not just how. See, when you know why, anyhow will do. What is the number one goal in America on January 1? Oh, weight loss. Husband says you got to lose it. Wife says you got to lose it. Doctor says you got to lose it. Finally, the poor sap says, I'll do it. For 13 days, he'll steam everything. Broccoli, dashboard, cardboard, headboard. He'll eat every god-awful thing. Day number 14, some dirty dog will roll the pastry cart by. With considerable disdain that comes from lack of discipline, this schmuck will eat one lousy donut. While the powdered sugar is still fresh on his upper lip, someone else will come by and say, hey, 2 for 1, chicken fried steak, you want to go? He says, I've already blown it today. I'll start back up tomorrow. Que sera, sera, another year goes by. Yesterday ended with last night. Today is the first day of the rest of your life. How do you challenge those assumptions? Learn why, not just how. Why is formulaic. When you know why, it's no longer about success, it's about significance. It's no longer about happiness, it's about joy. So let's navigate through this process. Inspire a shared vision. An investigative journalist, not the kind on CNN, I mean the good ones. An investigative journalist, Columbia Journalism School, Holy Grail of Journalism, 6 questions: who, what, when, where, why, and how. How do you create your own story? Ask yourself, who are you? My email ID says Anila's husband and Nick's dad. See, that was a blessing, everything else was a choice. If it wasn't for that woman that God placed in my life 31 years ago this past February, who's prayed for me every night and cheerled me every day, I would not be your speaker today. Who are you? But in America, fickle society, we borrow money we don't have to buy things we don't need, to impress people we don't like, and become someone we can't recognize. Because we are claiming an identity that is not real. Who are you? Make sure you answer that question. What is your non-negotiable? What is your inner circle? Where do you come from? Don't be so quick to run from your roots. There is something unique. That is a good tradition. But ask yourself this question: who are you? Where do you come from? Recently, I was in my hometown. 35 years ago, I went to the university in that town and applied, and they said, you don't even have the grades to request an application for the Faculty of Management Studies. And I felt rejected. I traveled, finding an identity. At an obscure new management school that had just opened up in the northern part of India where they didn't even have structure, I got admission. It was the only place that would take me, so I went. When that institute became successful in India, the first 25 years of its existence, I was then named one of the top 3 alumni of the last 25 years. So I made it. But this year, the original university that had rejected me invited me to deliver a lecture. 35 years later, I was invited to the same Faculty of Management Studies as a hometown hero who had done something. And the vice chancellor of that university then put a ceremonial shawl, and my father was in the audience, the first person clamming, saying, "Of you I am proud." It'll happen. Give it time. Where do you come from? Don't be afraid of your roots, even though they rejected you. Go back time and again. Stake it, fake it, make it, break it. Question 3, whom do you credit with the platform upon which you will build this? Who are the people who are going to be? See, the loneliest place in the world is the pinnacle of success. When you arrive at that point and you look around and the halo is shining on you, yet there's no one else that recognizes you because you forsook everything in the pursuit. Now, don't hear what I'm not saying. Money is not everything, but it ranks reasonably close to oxygen. When you need it, there is no substitute. Money bought me a house and it deeded me 2 more, but it'll never buy me a home with laughter. It bought me a bed, it'll never buy me a good night's sleep. It bought me a companion, it won't buy me a friend for life. It allows me to buy nice things, take that bride of mine on exotic trips, but it won't buy me a friend for life. I like the things money will buy, but I love the things money can't buy. Folks, you can get everything in this world that money will buy without a lick of character. See, the greatest truths in life are really simple. There are only 7 colors in the rainbow. Look at what Michelangelo did with the Sistine Chapel. There are only 7 musical notes. Look at what Chopin and Vivaldi did with them. Look what Elvis did with 2. There are only 10 mathematical digits. Look what Bernie Madoff did with those. It's not complicated. But why do we complicate it? Because when we fail, we can blame the system. We can blame the policies. We can blame the government. We can blame someone else. It's fun to play the blame game, isn't it? Problem is, as Cavett Robert, that great human engineer, once said, he said 80% of the people in this world don't care you have a problem. The other 20% really happy it's you. Nobody cares. Nobody cares. Whom do you credit? Make sure you don't let every Tom, Dick, and Harry into your world to rain on your parade. Have you ever noticed people with nothing to do want to do it with you? And they have to give. And you've also noticed a narrow mind and a fat head usually come on the same body, and some people will brighten up your life by leaving. But we hang on to them for the wrong reason. Cut them out of your life. If they don't add, if they don't contribute, here's the key, folks. You can go through life with critics who are destructive. You will only grow through life with critics who are constructive. You do need criticism to validate your existence. Make sure that criticism is of a constructive kind. What makes you laugh? For me, the broad exhibition of ignorance makes me laugh. And I don't know why people have stopped laughing. They walk around on eggshells, worried that they'll offend somebody. Laughter is a primal emotion. When you laugh, those endorphins are released, dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine. You get that internal high when you hear something that is lilting, something that is amusing. And yet we have cut laughter out because people are getting offended about everything. I was recently in Washington, D.C., and someone said, hey, what do you think of this big controversy with the Washington Redskins? I said, A, wrong Indian. But to set the matter straight, Columbus was looking for me. He found them by mistake. That's historical. I said, but I am offended. They said, thank you. I said, yeah, the part of that statement that offends me is Washington. Common sense is not common practice. You've noticed that people with a narrow mind and a fat head, they also look through a keyhole with both eyes. What makes me laugh is as I travel around, like tonight we'll get to the airport, there may be a delay, there may be whatever, and someone will yell at the only person in the airport who can't fly a plane. Nobody yells at the captain, he'll say, get off my bird. And then we get on, and this makes me just amused to no end. The flight attendant will come on. Now here's the glorified person in charge. She looks at me and says, the captain told me to tell you to buckle up. Everybody does it. Nobody says, tell him the admiral's not going to do it. We all buckle up. Then she'll give you this audacious announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, in case of an emergency, your seat bottom cushion could be used as a flotation device. Time out. You just got done telling me that I'm in a bird that ain't gonna fly, but this seat gonna float? I ain't buying it. You should stop selling it. But we do buckle up. 600 miles an hour, metal canister flying at 35,000 feet. We are safe. We're buckled. Folks, if something happens to that sucker, you're gonna die. The only reason they want you buckled, I've trained the airlines, is because in case of an accident, they want to know who sat where. It's convenience. You're saying that sounds morbid. No, what's morbid is people not buckling on the ground. Because we feel we're in control. That's asinine. 3 and 5, you live. See, what makes me laugh is the fact that we think we are logical when we are actually the most illogical people designed with emotion. Walking around pretending to be logical. In the name of all goodness. You're in a movie theater, you'll run into a friend, they'll say, hey, came to see the movie? No, just the posters. Of course I came to see the movie. I remember that guy from Texas who had that thing, I just want to go around this country giving people signs for saying stupid things. That makes me laugh. Like the wife saw her husband wet completely at the doorway and she says, well, is it raining? No, I took the fish for a walk. Of course it's raining. Here's your sign. There's got to be a moratorium on stupidity. But it's like it's growing by leaps and bounds, and now it's mainstay. If you watch the news, it should puzzle you as a common, decent human being that some of this nonsense is actually paraded, and people say it from their mouth. Educated people shouldn't be talking like that. But in my lifetime, one generation in this country, I've seen uneven distribution of wealth attributed to macroeconomics and microaggression. In my parents' generation, we just called it jealousy. You know what you won't find on the evening news? Is an Indian complaining that someone made fun of their accent. You'll never find an Indian complaining about anything. You can make all the jokes you want. Indians are doctors, they're engineers, they own motels, that's a given. Did you know they own $85 billion worth? Someone's laughing all the way to the bank. Guess what? They're doing it with an accent. But the Indian community has just surpassed the Jewish community as the most affluent in the United States. And they are the most educated already. because we were taught never to have envy. That's the next point. What makes me grieve is this depression economics that is being taught out there that is all based on envy. Folks, you can't hope without a strategy, change without a desire, whatever the words are that are used in public spectrum. I'm not a politician. I don't want to be one. The only thing I know about politics is poly is many and ticks are just blood-sucking creatures. My definition of a bureaucracy is a corrupt group of inept people totally committed to the concept of radically increasing their numbers so they can somehow take pure raw energy and convert it into solid waste. I'm just a first-generation migrant living the dream. In my book, The American Dream from an Indian Heart, I made this statement: we're not poor, we're too cheap to afford the once available commodity of dignity. We have literally ransacked the cellars of human pride and looted the morals that form the fabric of a responsible people. What makes me grieve is the loss of wonder, the loss of innocence, the loss of a primal desire to participate in this experiment called humanity. Emerson said, if you're going to pull me up, you better be on higher ground. Coach Joby Harris said, otherwise the day will come when by the sheer weight of our numbers, we will drag you down. You see, mediocrity and misery do love company. So let's look at this future. We're living in a boundaryless time, Jack Welch said. We're living in a modular time, and we're living in a virtual time. Eric Hoffer said, in times of change, it is the learners who will inherit the earth, while the learned will find themselves beautifully equipped for a world that no longer exists. And by the way, don't bother taking pictures and all that. They have the PowerPoint with them. If you want it, ask them. They'll send it to you. Someone asked me, do you believe in copyright? I said, no, I believe in copy wrong. If I give it to you, you'll copy it right. Otherwise, you'll copy it wrong and blame the immigrant. I don't want that issue. All right? But think about it. We live in this selfie-crazed digital. You know why we call it a selfie? We're too lazy to spell narcissistic. But we're living in some very, very fickle times. And I do believe that I cannot even believe the hell that is going to be unleashed on us down if we don't perfect some of these systems now. What is boundaryless? You can literally make a transaction anywhere in the world today without leaving the confines of your computer. You can create pockets of excellence and transfer that excellence. But what scares me most is this virtual hub. See, people are swiping relationships. They're checking statuses. They're posting their emotions. When we were growing up, some of us, if a young girl's diary was stolen by her sister and she threatened to tell everybody, man, there was holy hell to pay. But today, we post our innermost thoughts on Facebook, and then if nobody likes it, we get upset. How opposite have we become? No real relationships. Everything is online. But the tears are not digital. Folks, I do a lot of consulting. I was in Bangalore, India, a couple of months ago. I'll leave the name of the company out of it. I made this similar statement. And a man who has 3 German cars in his driveway came to me and said, will you talk to my 14-year-old girl? She took one of those German cars and wanted to end it all. That girl came with her father. We sat in the hotel lobby that evening. And about 4 and 5 questions into it, the girl broke into a small grin. She wiped the tears and began to laugh. And the father asked the girl the question, why did you respond to him and not to me? And she said, he asked me what I was feeling. You just tell me how I should feel. You're always too busy acquiring wealth, money. Tom mentioned this. See, the Bible says, what profiteth a man to gain the whole world, lose his soul? And brother, I have a poem that I say to my son, son, I may never amass diamonds. I may never gather gold. My colleagues may consider me a failure when my business life is told. But if you can grow up godly, my son, I'll be glad, for I know I'll have been successful as your dad. If there is a passion to pursue and a purpose to process, there is always a price to pay. And that price is being paid in relationships. Our children are sinking deeper and deeper into this online abyss. No rescue because they don't sit around a table and talk anymore. I was jokingly telling someone, I said, now most of your relationships are online. When I had to court and pursue my bride, I had to stand in line. August 16, 1982, I saw her there, prettiest thing I'd ever seen, and I immediately switched all the courses I wanted to take to the one she was taking. Every hour on the hour, I walked up to her and said, will you marry me? She says, no, get away from me, creep. 11 months on the hour, I asked her, we had become friends, but she refused the proposal. December 23rd, 1983, she said yes. I said, yes what? I'd forgotten the question. See, when you look back 31 years later on that, I can look at my son in his eyes and tell him how to treat a lady. I can look at my son in his eyes and tell him how to be a gentleman. But I can look at my son without any fear of error and ask him. And my son responded when I said, son, what is the one thing about your parents' relationship that gives you hope? He says, you love mom, you tell her, and you tell me that you love her. And as a result of that, I will never have to choose. Dad, you've been gone all of my life. She's raised me, but she raised me to respect you. Respect, loyalty, shrinking. Now, granted, like I said, I'm a sociologist in the sense that I look at where our motivations are falling. The other day I asked my son, I said, check in with your mother. He was traveling with me last week. He's 24, graduate mechanical engineer, graduated debt-free from college in 4 years, brought a product to market. Brilliant kid, 24 years old. I said, check in with your mother. He said, at what stage? How old do I have to be before I have to stop checking in with mom? I said, I'm 55 and I'm still terrified of her. Don't ask me questions that I can't answer, boy. I can tell you, if that woman ever leaves me, I'm going with her. That's why I say marriage is grand, divorce is $100,000. In fact, in one seminar, someone asked me, he said, how often should I tell my wife I love her? I said, before somebody else does. Folks, hear me carefully. We don't have family values anymore because society has now convinced us we don't need to value the family. I was reading some statistics in a book called Fatherless America. Every sitcom, father is portrayed as a bumbling idiot, mom as superwoman, maybe rightfully so. Every time a drink is offered on TV, it's accepted. Promiscuity rampant. And 55, 60, 70% of the homes, either the father is not there by choice or he's emasculated. How can we talk about values? Dennis Waitley said, value is in the doer, not the deed. We can perfect deeds, but we have to perfect intrinsic value, intrinsic worth. Folks, someone has to stand tall and say, enough. We're not allowing you to denigrate this holy process anymore. Like I said, I don't have a dog in this fight. But what pains me is the people who raised me in this country. Read Zig Ziglar's book, Courtship After Marriage. 300 couples who had all been married 30 years were asked 300 questions. Most of them lived boring lives, drove the same car, lived in the same house. This couple in England had been married, they were in their late 90s, had been now married 75 years. And they asked them, what is the secret to your marriage? This lady looked and said, they said, do you fight? She said, all the time. But you've been married 75 years. She says, yeah, very early in our marriage I realized that he couldn't sleep if I didn't hold his hand. That's it. For 75 years, every night, she made sure she held his hand. It's not complicated. We make it complicated because society convinces us of another norm. Don't listen to that nonsense, okay? So what is this law of peak performance? Before we do that, some of you are looking at me saying, but Krish, you look old and you look like you are archaic. And I am. I am a relic. Some of you are a little older than me, but for those of you who are wondering how old I am, this past January I celebrated the 35th anniversary of my 20th birthday. So I've had a few trips around the sun, but there was a guy like me who felt old and not useful. So he decided to move to a small town and set up a shop. And he just said, I'll call myself Dr. Geezer. There was a young whippersnapper who was cynical. He said, I think this old man is conning the young people. And we live in a very cynical world. Anything that someone comes as advice always has to be looked through with these jaded observations. So this old guy would just put up as a Dr. Geezer. If I can cure you, $500. If I can't cure you, I'll give you $1,000. The youngster went to him and said, Doc, I can't taste. I'm losing my sense of taste. He said, oh, that's easy. Nurse, go to bin number 23, bring 2 drops of the liquid, put it in the patient's mouth. He says, gasoline. He says, congratulations, you have your taste back. That's $500. Knowing that he had been conned, he went back 2 weeks later. He says, Doc, I seem to be losing my memory. Doctor said, oh, that's easy, nurse. Go to bin number 23, bring 3 drops of the liquid, put it in the patient's mouth. He says, oh, no, you don't. That's gasoline. He says, congratulations. You got your memory back. That'll be $500. Now, knowing that he has to come up with a better plan, he waits 3 weeks, goes back, and says, Doc, I seem to be losing my sight. The doc says, I don't have a cure for that. Here's your $1,000. He said, that's only $500. He said, congratulations. You got your sight back. Now, the reason I say that tongue-in-cheek is something very similar happened in my life when I first came to this country. I looked around, and there was an unsettling going on. Oil was trading at $9 a barrel. The economy was in doldrums, real estate market. People said, man, it's the wrong time to migrate. Folks, throughout the annals of American history, there's never been a wrong time to get here. Within created order, there is not a land that has ever existed that looks like this, nor will be ever a land that follows, that has had and done what this country has done. I have traveled to much of the free world, and I've yet to meet an embassy or a consul somewhere in the world where there was not a line standing out there saying, let me in. But I remember when I came here, I started buying into the hype, and I ran into Zig Ziglar's book, See You at the Top. In that book, very early, there is a story of a balloon salesman in New York. He's selling balloons. And every time there's a lull in his sale, he releases a balloon and a crowd gathers because they saw that flurry. A young African-American kid walks up to him and says, sir, if you release a black balloon, will it go up? And the balloon salesman gives us words of wisdom when he said, son, it's what's on the inside of the balloon that makes it rise, and my career took off. How much do you believe in your God-ordained identity, regardless of the hype that other people? Folks, in the world we live in, perception is fact. Fact is never fact. If perception was not a fact, how did John Shalikashvili, it's a tough name to pronounce, was born in Warsaw, Poland, become the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the first recipient of the Navy Distinguished Leadership Award? How did General Colin Powell, son of Jamaican immigrants, become the chairman of Joint Chiefs of Staff and the first black Secretary of State? See, as I was going through this process, I began to realize the one thing that was successfully done that prevents us from experiencing this law is this. We have jettisoned morality from the public debate and replaced it with the word justice. See, morality means morals. Morals means moral law. Moral law means moral lawgiver. It means accepting that there is a God. That's why John Adams said, this Constitution will only work for the holy, God-ordained people with a moral foundation. It is useless for anyone else. When we made it justice, it became about judges. And I was watching this from the sidelines saying, what is the easy way around this? I said, put blinders on and don't care. Other people can tell you what you can or cannot be, only you can fulfill it, said Eleanor Roosevelt. How then do we go now from this point forward? Let's look at this law. The law of peak performance states that most people will continue to remain in the comfort zone and never move into the effective zone unless the possibilities and probabilities of such momentum are revealed to them from sources they trust, admire, and respect. So now ask yourself this question: who have you been taking input from? And are their lives the sum total of what you want to become like? Or are you going to look at other people's lives and say, you know what? They seem to be living amidst this vast morass of nonsense. The other day, someone asked my bride this question. They said, how can you guys do a marriage seminar when he's been traveling for most of your life? She's the longest married single mom I know. Folks, I spend 120 nights a year in a hotel room. I do 120 events in at least 8 countries annually. And that doesn't even include my domestic schedule. This past week, I passed 4 million miles on just American Airlines. I've been gone a lot, but I love her answer. She said, our marriage was never designed to be one of proximity. It was ordained to be one of example. She says, he goes and does what he does best. I stay back and do what I do best. Did you hear what I just said? There's an ordained role we get to play. And that's what this means. When you choose that role, when you begin to understand that there is innate potential within you, there is a desire to do more, to have more, to give more, to bless, to travel, to do all the things that money and all the things you've talked about. Who are the sources you will trust, admire, and respect to allow that information in? Otherwise, it gets convoluted and it gets polluted. I remember I've done a lot of prison ministry as a volunteer. Don't look at me like I'm out on parole. In fact, even in prisons, I find it very fascinating. America is the only country where you can be sent to prison for illegally having cable in your house. But when you get there, it's free. But I was in one of the prisons, and I don't know if you know the name Bill Glass. Bill Glass was a former All-Pro for the Cleveland Browns. Ran an organization called Champions for Life out of Dallas, Texas, and he did rehabilitation in prisons for almost all of his career has been that focus. So Jim Sundberg, an all-star catcher for the Kansas City Royals, used to accompany Bill Glass on some of these events. And I remember in one of the prison events we were at, I heard the story that Jim Sundberg used to tell. He was talking to an inmate and said, I'm exactly where my father said I would be. And so the inmate asked him the question, what do you mean? He says, when we used to play catch in the backyard in California, my father would say, Sonny, you keep that up and one day you'll play in the World Series. And the inmate said, I'm exactly where my father said I'd be. You keep doing that, you'll end up in jail. And I've done this work, so when I started getting fascinated by prisons, how do people end up there? What is it? Forget the crime aspect of it, but what is the tipping point? And here's a startling statistic, and that's why I tell you, I will give you jarring information, but it will be backed up by data. Within the American prison system, people of Jewish origin are the smallest percentage, so small that it's not even counted as a category of all religious groups in American prisons. So what has a Jewish father done since the beginning of time? God bless you, my son, I love you, my son, and then a hug or a kick, since Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, I want you to connect that principle with this statement. Trust, admire, and respect. Make sure that your conduits of information are small. Make sure that you're receiving from reliable places, but you're also transmitting to reliable places. Why? Adrian Rogers said, learn as if you will live forever. Teach as if you will die tomorrow. When you go back from here, make sure whatever you have been inspired with from the information that you got, you immediately tell someone. That'll force you to come back and learn new things. You can't remember everything, but what you do remember, give it away. As soon as you give it away, that'll free you up to learn new things. That makes you an effective catalyst. Learn as if you will live forever. Teach as if you will die tomorrow. And suddenly this law of peak performance with all those principles will coalesce. Some amazing things will begin to happen. Before you realize it, you'll have moved on. Before you realize it, you're no longer standing in line without something to read. Before you realize it, you're not just sitting there to get there, you're sitting there to arrive more informed. Before you realize it, you're engaging in something like Automobile University. University of Southern California did a study. They said if you live in the United States and you're in an average metropolitan area and commute about or drive about 12,000 miles a year, and all of us qualify. 12,000 miles a year. Within the span of 3 years, you could get the equivalent of 2 years of college just as a passive listener. Listening to information, good, clean, pure, powerful, and positive. And for crying out loud, stop listening to country western music. God, worse lyrics I have never seen written in the history of humanity. My wife ran away with my best friend, and I sure do miss him. Or you're the reason our kids are ugly. These things communicate. But psychologists have said the first input into your mind every morning is more powerful than the next 5. Aaron, my good friend Victor's son, is with us. Aaron's been my roommate on this trip. He'll vouch for it. I woke up at 4:30 this morning and prepared for you. I've done this before. And one of these days it'll be the last one I do. I don't want you ever leaving a room saying, man, when I got him, he was just going through the motions. I want you to feel that I gave it everything, and that's why I need to prepare. When I'm done, if you don't like what I've done, at least I know I gave it all. I don't want to feel bad after saying I didn't give my effort. Character is the ability to have pride in the mundane. What is the mundane? What you do every day. The moment you have pride in what you do every day, you will become a peak performer and you will be in the effective zone. Have you ever noticed some people have more joy doing the same thing that other people do? You walk into a place to get a cup of coffee, and the attitude of that person is different from the person standing next to them, and they both do the same thing. That is pride in the mundane. Character is the ability to have that pride. What is pride? Personal responsibility instilling in me a desire for excellence. Personal. Nobody needs to tell me to do it. But we're living in a world where it has no grade. How many of you may have seen that movie, Meet the Parents? I watch movies to just see as a counterculture, but Meet the Parents is a movie where Bob De Niro plays this tough CIA character and Dustin Hoffman plays this loosey-goosey, completely hippie type. And when Bob De Niro goes to his house, he sees that the son, they have the award of the son up on the wall. And it's the 7th place trophy. Robert De Niro in his gruff CIA voice says, 7th place? And Dustin Hoffman in his hippie attitude says, oh yeah, they go all the way up to 12 now. This is the world we live in, 12th place trophies. When I was growing up, my brother was a jock. I mean, this guy won every award. He was the center in hockey, he was the wicketkeeper in cricket, he was the springboard diving champion, he was the javelin champion, he was the 100-meter champion. I mean, this guy, my parents would not sit down. They constantly clapped for his awards. And here I was, always slightly overweight kid, low self-esteem. So the school decided they wanted to do something for the slow, fat kids. On sports day, this is when you celebrate achievement. If you're slow and fat, sports day, you're a spectator, which is America 101. 75,000 people desperately in need of exercise, yelling at 22 people desperately need a rest. So the school comes up to my parents and says, we know how bad you feel when the younger one doesn't go and get an award, so we're going to put him in a play. A play on sports day. And I was the potted plant. No lines. And I fainted out of stage fright. I share that story that we were taught that success is not who you are in relation to the person sitting next to you. That's comparison. Success is who you are in relation to where you began and what you began with. Success then is always a journey. The destination for a believer would be well done. Otherwise, it's a journey. But we have made success about comparison and not about completion. And most people never even start a process because they feel they're ill-equipped to belong. Folks, hear me carefully if you hear nothing else I've ever said this morning. Believe you belong in whatever you set out to do. If it's a financial goal, a wealth goal, whatever you said, believe that you have already fulfilled it. Believe you belong. If you don't, you won't. And that is important. It is important to understand that this is not some elusive commodity that a few people have. Understanding that will propel you in different ways. Second, I would encourage you to read outside your sphere of influence. That's the only way you understand what happens in this world. Read. On average, if you read 20 minutes a day, just for 20 minutes a day, at the end of the year, you'll complete 20 books that are 200 pages in length. And that's 19 more than the competition bought. So that's that edge. Getting that edge requires. Sybil Stanton wrote a book called The 25-Hour Woman. In that she says, discipline is not on your back needling you with imperatives. It's at your side encouraging you with incentives. Discipline is not on your back needling you with imperatives. It's at your side encouraging you with incentives. See, the day you make yourself a slave to discipline, the world will become your oyster. So how do we get that discipline? Is it too late for some of us? No. Mary Stepanek was 7 when he started writing award-winning poetry. He knew he had a rare muscular dystrophic condition that would cause his demise. There was no cure for it. He was on Larry King Live 7 times, checked out of this world by the time he was 14 years old, and wrote 7 books on poetry. Age is not an issue. Pablo Casals was in his 90s after he had moved from Spain to the United States. He was practicing his cello. He had already become a maestro. And someone said, "Why do you keep practicing?" He said, "I think I'm making progress." Spectrum, it has nothing to do with age. It has nothing to do with gender. It has nothing to do with demographics. It has nothing to do with geography. It has nothing to do with politics. It has nothing to do with ethnicity. It has nothing to do with linguistics. I can give you success stories from just about every sphere of life. But believing you belong in that genre, beginning to understand that there is nothing that can prevent you if you want to. Watch me carefully. What's the worst that can happen? You try something you've never tried before. You fall flat on your face. You break even. You didn't have it to begin with. You gave it a shot. You came up short. Big whoop. Folks, failure is an event. In the history of humanity, it has never been a person. You can fail at something. You cannot fail as someone. God loves you too much. Once these things started internalizing, I was no longer the scared immigrant. I was no longer the kid who had an accent that would have to compete. I developed a universal one. I was no longer worried about criticism. I welcomed it if it improved me. I began to understand the difference between refusal and rejection. People can refuse you, which means they're giving you permission to learn a new skill. Nobody can reject you unless you give them permission to do so. And once you understand these things, the world becomes more fun to live in. Because you brush off the nonsense that doesn't bother you. I remember I was invited to speak in South Carolina or somewhere, and people, of course, they have the perception, they look on the program and some Indian name they can't pronounce, and the host is saying, "Oh, you need to come hear this guy," and this guy is like, of course, it's a medical convention, so, I'm Indian, so I'm almost half doctor. That's, so... So this guy comes to me, and I don't know what it is about, and I'm a communicator. I teach communication for a living. Believe it or not, this immigrant who came here, 100% of my communication classes that I conduct in Dallas are people who were born and raised here. So I understand, and this is the one thing I know about communication. When you see someone from another country speaking slowly and loudly, it doesn't change anything. You're still speaking English, but now you're annoying. They're not deaf. So this guy walks up to me and says, "I hear you are our speaker today." What do you mean? I might as well mirror. I said, "Yes, and I hope to be how you say good." Well, he walked away with deer in a headlight look, saying, "Man, 2 hours of this would be like nails on a chalkboard. I can't believe they're paying for this." When I finished, he came and he says, "I'm so sorry." I said, "Don't worry, the check cleared." He says, "Why didn't you correct me then?" I said, "I do not have enough time in this world to cater to perception." I just don't have time to cater to perception. It is a waste of time. I had spoken for a company in Dallas at one of the nice hotels. Now, when ladies dress up, you look amazing. You have all these outfits. When guys look up, we look like waiters. Everybody's in a tuxedo. It's just a different color penguin. So I finished speaking. I'm standing there waiting for my car, which fortunately we had the ability to valet. And Anila was in her sequin gown. So I said, sweetheart, why don't you go get the car? So she went to the valet. This guy walks up behind me, thinks I'm the official cab getter for the hotel. He was just in the session that I had spoken at. He said, I need a cab. Now, folks, I don't know what you know about big hotels without getting all caught up in the wrong stuff. Remember, I don't have patience or time or energy to deal with stupidity that comes out of ignorance. It's just a waste of energy. But if you're in a big hotel, this guy is right here. I just raised my hand and a cab came. Now, I'm a salesperson, so I always think a good deed deserves a reward. So I just leave the hand open like this in case. Just in case. Well, he slipped me $2. And I put it in my wallet. I'm still standing there. Now there's a line behind me. This other guy comes up and he says, so now I'm getting into it. You know, I'm having fun with it, right? Anila walks up and says, what are you doing? I said, if you're quiet, I think we can get a vacation out of today. Now, she's not that. She doesn't roll that way. I understand that. But I just don't have patience. But I do know one thing. If ignorance exists, why should I be insulted if there is an ability to profit? Right? When I used to sell books and tapes for Mr. Ziglar, I'd be at the back. People would walk up to me and say, which way is the restroom? Mr. Ziglar said, Krish, is it really that way? I said, no, but it's away from the table. If you're not buying, you better be in a restroom, and I don't care. If it's urgent, you'll find it. But it's not here. Do you see a sign that says restroom here? What do I look like, the official restroom pointer? Again, common sense. But here's the thing. We're having fun with this. When did it become against the law to have fun? Now, here's the thing. Tom asked this question, what is a non-negotiable in your life? For me, one non-negotiable in my life is I will never go through a day without allowing someone to have laughed a little and I focus energy to lighten their spirits. That is my commitment. I like to make people laugh. Now, sometimes I have to use myself as the object, whatever it is. But the other non-negotiable in my life is I will never go through any day feeling miserable because of someone's perception. That's not on me. That's a travesty to my bride and my son that I bring that nonsense home. Come off a trip and say, oh, you're not going to believe how they treat me. They kick me out of line because they think I'm being a this guy. My son will say, yeah, we missed you for the last 21 days. They don't want to hear that. Nobody wants to hear that. So the non-negotiables become important. Let's navigate a little further. Causing others to want you. Are you guys having fun with this? Is this? Okay. If not, it's all I got. All right? So let's look at this, causing others to want your leadership. All right? Dynamic. People with fluidity, they exhibit a thirst. This is out of the book Top Performance that I wrote with Mr. Ziglar. I was one of the co-authors. How do you get this doses of wanting? We use it in leadership, but you can use it in life. Become dynamic. Someone who is fluid. People gravitate towards you because you are a catalyst of information. They know that you're constantly going to facilitate reactions, but you're going to stay objective. Which means you are someone they can lean on for new information, for new ideas, that you made that commitment. Be dynamic. I remember one time we were on a plane flying somewhere, and Mr. Ziglar was writing his notes. I said, Mr. Z, I've heard you do this talk 500 times. Why are you still preparing? He said, son, in today's audience may be the grandson of the grandfather I impacted 50 years ago, who's going through a problem, and the grandfather told the grandson, hey, I want you to go hear old Zig, he'll fix you up. I don't want the grandson to go back and tell the grandfather, when you got him, he cared. When I got him, he was just counting the dollars. I owe it to the, hear me carefully, I owe it to the grandfather to be ready for the grandson. Folks, at that time, this man was making $75,000 a speech. And if any of you have heard Zig Ziglar, you know he had that old Southern accent. So when he went, $500. Okay? I owe it to the grandfather to be ready for the grandson. What a privilege to have known him. This man in the throes of Alzheimer's, I remember having lunch with him about 4 months before he passed, and I have those notes on my phone. I'm literally crying, no, I'm about to lose my hero. And out of the fog of Alzheimer's, God gives this man wisdom as he leans forward and says, did I ever have anything to do with teaching you? I said, yes, sir. He says, just remember, people who have good teachers have a better chance. And then he faded away. 2 days before he died, I was called into the hospital room. Cindy said, Baba, go in there. He's talking to all of us. Briefly, he opens his eyes. None of us are going to be there. I said, what am I going to do? They said, just go, hold his hand. This is when the gurgling sounds are going on. Impending death is around the corner. Most of you have been there, had loved ones. You know what I'm talking about. But this is Superman. This is the man I needed as that scared immigrant. This is Superman without his cape. And I'm holding his hand and telling him about the time we were in Panama, the time we were in Hong Kong, the time we were in the Philippines. Remember this, Mr. Z? Remember when we were in Boston right after 9/11 and they pulled me to the side and they wanted to do all this interrogation and you stepped into the tent and said, I was your son? Remember that? And he briefly opened his eyes and 3 times he said, thank you, Lord, for this boy. Dynamic. Till the very day he went, is the most dynamic person I'd ever met. Constantly on the grow, not just on the go. Be organized. Now, by organized, Michelle mentioned, wherever you go, there you are. The same guy who made that statement also said, when you see a turtle on a fence post, you can rest assured it didn't get there by itself. There's a reason why things happen. And by organized, I mean be someone who understands. See, if you have to swallow a frog, you don't want to look at that sucker too long. He ain't going to get any prettier. Just swallow it and get it out of the way. But don't be so organized to the fact that, and it's okay. I mean, Shelley, who works with me in our office, the most organized person I know. She works almost in a virtual digital world as she represents me. Maybe in the office no more than 10 hours a week. But I've never seen anybody that well organized. That's the nature. But by organized, I want to add a component to it. Learn to do the most disagreeable thing every day first. Most of us have lists, but we put the bad stuff off till the end of the day. And the reason I say that is, Herb True from Notre Dame put it this way. He says, imagine waking up one day, or imagine not waking up one day. What would the regret be? See, if you have to give somebody the bad news, get it out of the way so you can enjoy the wins. But if you have the wins during the day and you have to give somebody the bad news, the wins lose their flavor because you're worried about the bad news. So that's why even when I fire people, and I fired my fair share, I do it very positively. I call them in and I say, you know what? I don't know what we're going to do without you, but starting tomorrow, we're going to try. And at least that way it sounds better, I like my friend, he put it this way. He put up his entire org chart, put up the vision plan, mission board. He says, this is our strategy. And those of you that can't find your name on there, just consider yourselves not part of it. He didn't even turn around. But by organized, I mean in all areas of your life. The first voice I have to hear every morning is the voice of my bride. The last voice I have to hear every night is the voice of my bride. Sometimes when I travel, it's not convenient. So this woman will gauge the time of the city I'm about to arrive into, know the hotel I'm about to check into in the old days before cell phones, and would leave a voicemail for me. She knows that I won't sleep till I hear her voice. Now, it's not because I can't sleep. I've just made it my discipline that unless I hear her voice, I am going to be restless. What is your discipline? That's what I mean. Be organized in every area of your life. Again, remember the word they gave, non-negotiable. Sensitive. These leaders are welcoming of input. Sensitivity has taken a knock for whatever reason. It's okay to be sensitive. The most successful leaders I've met are emotional people, where the EQ enters the picture. But be sensitive to the needs of other people. Now, what does this mean? In anthropology, it means studying other people groups. Ask people when you look at people with different backgrounds, study their heroes, study their backgrounds, study their culture, study their evolutions, study their primary currencies, their principal exports, their primary imports. There was a book when I first got started, it was called Kiss, Bow, or Shake Hands, one page on each country. There are 210 or 212 principalities, a little more now recognized by the United Nations. This is the only place in the world where at least we have one person from every one of those recognized entities. How do I know that? Well, the United Nations is based in New York, so at least one person from every one of those countries is in New York, if not more. But how do you interact with people? So when I go to Indonesia, I know how to talk to them. When I go to China, I know how to talk to them. Motivation is a motive for action. Whose motive is it? See, if you're motivating someone so you'd look good, that's manipulation. So be sensitive. The world is a melting pot. There are a lot of moving parts to it. But most recently, 3-4 weeks ago, maybe 3.5 weeks ago, I was in Kenya. I did a pastor's conference in Mai Mahiu, which is in the Great Rift Valley. For those of you who do not know geographically, the Great Rift Valley actually begins in the broader Middle East and ends in Mozambique. It's about 9,000 kilometers that cuts through the continent of Africa. So in that place, on the red dirt, we erected a tent, and we had people from the Maasai tribe there. One of the great joys of my life. I've been an itinerant for most of it, but as I looked out, I'm standing there, and I'm actually delivering the message in this tent, and in front of me are the Maasai in their ceremonial vestments. And I suddenly remembered I had learned enough about Africa to be legitimate there. See, back in the 1700s, a man named Robert Moffat stood up and he said, a smoke that billows from 1,000 African villages is a desire for me to go and take the good news of the gospel to those places. Livingston was in his living room and said, I will go. Livingston then went to Africa, ended up marrying Moffat's daughter. I knew this history. Short place from where our tent was the Robert Moffat Seminary in Kijabe, Kenya. And when I shared the story, the Kenyans came to me and said, you know more about us than we knew about our own history. You are believable. And I'm a guy from India who came to America. See how the divine footprint works. Know more about people than they know more about themselves, and you will be welcomed into any society, into any boundary, into any culture, into any people group. Because then your motivation and your desire is pure. Right? Be effective. We talked about that, the difference between, and some of you have done this with me before, but just raise your right hand for me as high as it'll go. Now raise it a little higher. Why didn't you do that to begin with? I said as high as it'll go. We all save a little bit for a rainy day that doesn't come. That's what effectiveness is. Being effective is understanding that 3%. We all know that as high as you go is not that. Internally, we are wired to know that there is higher. But why do we stop? And this is an interesting question. I've done this all over the world. Same response. We know as high as our arm will go is maybe standing on the table, but let's assume we didn't do that. In our chair, why do we leave a little bit? Human tendency to not give it your all. Human tendency to save a little bit because you don't know if you're going to need it. And we do that as basic psychology. We don't do that in any other area of life. Classic example is this very city. When you see people land here, the excitement with which they waltz into the casinos. You know, they don't call it lost wages for nothing. And then tonight on the plane, they will be there with that depression. When you look at the lights in the city, do you think someone's losing? Why wouldn't you think it wouldn't be you? Speculation. Human desire is a very interesting thing. In our hearts, we want everything. In our hearts, we are already miserable knowing we're not going to get it. And yet you want to trudge through life. That's drudgery. Be effective by picking those battles that you have a chance to win. Don't fight battles that you know you're going to lose. And strong-willed, firm but fair, we talked about that. Let me give you the communication components. After this, I do one more thing, and then I'll open it up for some questions, comments, snide remarks, and then we'll navigate from there. So it doesn't look like I'm just yakking, but messaging is vital. Many of us, unfortunately, are stuck in this thing called frivolous communication, meaningless banter. Any of you have teenage kids? Don't want to talk about it? All right. Yeah, right. So when my boy was a teenager, communication with him was like this. And I communicate for a living, and I paid, for everything in his life, including that beautiful smile he now has, which we had to get braces for, by communicating. So it really irritates me when I talk to my son, and his communication is off. Where are you going? Nowhere. I don't care what version of Star Wars you watch. There is no such thing in human time and space as nowhere. If you go from here to there, you're there. But he would look and flip it. Where are you going? Nowhere. Who are you going with? No one. This just gets better. What you doing? Nothing. So now this guy is suddenly, he's warped into this cosmic, mindless Jedi trick. I'm going nowhere with no one to do nothing. And when you're coming back, don't know. So now it's a timeless warp. But then the audacity of frivolous communication rears its ugly head when he looks at me and he says, "Can you spot me $20?" So let me get this straight. You want to go nowhere with no one to do nothing and not know when you're coming back, but you want me to finance it. I ain't the government. That's not how this works. But that's what you go with frivolous communication. You'll meet a well-meaning person in Dallas on the elevator. And if you really want to watch frivolous communication, just stand on an elevator and watch conversation if it does take place. Can you believe the heat? Yep. 30 years in Dallas, never accidentally seen a snowflake in July. What are you expecting, Sherlock? And if you're me, you get really random frivolous communication. "Hey, you're from India, aren't you? What gave it away?" And then the doozy, the coup de grace. "My doctor is Indian. Do you know him?" "No, and he doesn't know me either." So that's frivolous communication, just meaningless banter. There's no add-on. In frivolous communication, nobody cares you're there. Level 2 is factual communication. This is Sergeant Friday-esque. When someone says, "How you doing?" "Fine." That's a grade of sandpaper. It's not a response. Good, since it's Friday. Watch people in the morning. They will line up 20 deep to get a cup of coffee. And apparently they're useless without it. Because it has to be a certain brand. I remember one guy saying, "Man, I can't believe that they charge so much for a cup of coffee." I said, the word is Starbucks. Whatever gave you the feeling that it would be cheaper, it's plural in the very advertising. What is wrong with you? And Starbucks, it's called the Starbucksization of America. Steve Forbes talks about it. Think about it. A small is called a tall, in case you have self-image issues. A tall is called a grande. Now you feel Emperor, Napoleon. Nobody knows what the heck a venti is. Just made up stuff. And people lining up 20 deep. I love this one, frivolous. "How you doing?" "Well, I'm a morning person." "I'm not a morning person." "Well, move to the West Coast." "What do you mean you're not a morning person? The sun rises. You're up." Common sense. Level 3 is feeling. Folks, this is where the fun begins. In frivolous communication, nobody cares you're there. In factual communication, they react because you're there. In feeling communication, they begin to respond because you're there. You want to be at feeling or beyond. You want people to respond. Family, you want them to respond. I remember coming home one day and my bride said, "Apparently I'm the only one in the house who knows how to load a dishwasher." Factually, that's what she said. Like an idiot, factually I responded, "Apparently you are." This is when it took an ugly turn and went nonverbal, when I finally took the fork out of my ear and stopped the bleeding. I said, "That was rather harsh." See, she was not expecting a response. What she was saying is, "I'm sorry it happened. I'm sorry, whatever it is." When I come home and there's a problem in the house, Anila does not want me to fix it. She's run that house by herself in my absence all of our married life. "Honey, the dishwasher's broken." Oh, you call the repairman? No, I called an astronaut. What are you, the last of the smart people? Idiot. I mean, she doesn't say that, but I know that's what she's thinking. And guys and gals, this is where we get in trouble. Women and men, we communicate differently, and we don't understand that our feelings are all warped. Guys, when your significant other holds up 2 outfits and says which one, run. You're not smart enough. On all the intelligence in the world, your answer will be wrong, and you have a 50% shot. She has already made up her mind. She just wants to see if you have a pulse. She knows you're colorblind. She also is pretty sure you're color ignorant. Run. Ladies, you're not at fault either. I mean, you're not going to get off scot-free either. I've been out to dinner thousands of times. I've never heard a guy one time walk up to me and says, hey, Krish, why don't you, Phil, and Bob go to the restroom with me? If they ever did, I ain't going. But I don't know what it is about you ladies. One of you will stand up, nod your head, collect a crowd. When you get an invitation, feeling comes in. Women receive an invitation for their 5, 10, 15-year high school reunion. Look in the mirror, look at the invitation, look in the mirror. Oh my God, I got to lose the size of a Buick by Saturday. Ain't about to happen. But that's a feeling communication. See, when a woman says, I have nothing to wear, guys, she's saying, I have nothing new to wear. Ladies, when a guy says, I have nothing to wear, he's saying, I have nothing clean to wear. Okay? And we get this all backwards. As soon as we understand that feeling, communication, EQ, and we begin to understand that, see, there's a difference between nurturing and all of that. And I do it in comedy. But I learned this the hard way. Anila figured out that because I travel, if she asked me an open-ended question, her answer, if she asked me a closed-ended question, the answer would be one she wouldn't like. If I came home off a trip and she says, sweetheart, you want to go out somewhere? No. Guess where I just came from? Out. Planes go out. What's she saying? All week I've had the kid, and I've been talking to a clown that takes my order, and I got a kid with $10,000 worth of headgear and a paper hat messing it up. Can we go somewhere where we sit down and people ask me what I want? That's what she's asking. But she asked it wrong. I don't want to go out. I want to sit in the lazy boy named after me and not move a muscle. So Anila read Zig Ziglar's Secrets of Closing the Sale. So as soon as she picks me up at the airport, she says, so do you want to do Italian or Mexican? There's no option C, which is neither. So she's figured out, if she wants me to do something, she gives the 2 options and the boundary. It's common sense. But why do we mess it up? We mess it up because we don't understand just simple how people are wired. Folks, feeling is vital. EQ has to be in communication if you want results. Right? Early in our marriage, before I knew all of this, I was making jokes about her cooking. Oh yeah, I know how it sounds because everybody has been there. And for those of you guys who have not done this, you lie about other things too. But she was standing there within earshot, and I thought she was not there. When I turned, I caught that expression, which was one of just absolute disgust. And I did what all guys have done. I lied. I said, if you forgive me this one time, I'll never do it again, knowing I was going to do it next week. It's just our nature. But when I said, sweetheart, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it, I'll never do it again, she corrected it by saying, with considerable feeling, oh, it's all right. I was just hoping to have married a man who would have never done it in the first place. Ouch. That still stings 30 years later. So there's just a right way to do it. Level 4 is fellowship. Fellowship is when they continue to perform because you were once there. This is legacy. See, you learned all about wealth. If you live your lives to leave an inheritance, those that get it, really glad you're dead. Okay, it's just a fact of life. They're just tripping over each other in the lawyer's office to see whose name is at the top of that. So don't live your life to leave an inheritance. Live your life to leave a legacy. The good book said, a good name is worth more than silver and gold. See, when 9/11 happened, our life became a living hell. I traveled for a living. My boy was called out in school. Someone said, damn, all these foreigners, send them all home. He was born in Denton County, but he looks different. He was Indian mother, Indian father. So when your boy is crying at the dining table, what do you say? I said, son, I can't change one iota of where we were, where we're from. I can't change one iota of why we came here. I can't change one iota of how you look. I can't even change one iota of how your mom and I sound. But this I can change. From this day forward, I will travel the length and breadth of this country and praise its virtue. So that someday, someone will walk up to you and say, Nick, I sure am glad your dad came to America. He changed my life. Son, I can give you a good name. That's fellowship. So ask yourself, if you're going to live legacy-oriented thinking. Someone asked me one time, he said, Mr. Dhanam, what do you want said at your funeral? I want the pastor to say, he's still moving. You know, because I still have things to do. But barring that, I want them to hear, proud husband, loving father. My bride was asked this question. I go into some very hostile parts of the world, my friends. You need to know the truth. When I went to Kenya, it was a hostile time between the two. The election had been upheld. It was in the Supreme Court. The last time Kenya went through an election process, 1,700 people died in the civil war that ensued. Some of the places we go in, some of the countries I leave unnamed, are hostile. And my bride has to let me go on each of those trips, knowing any one of them, I may not come back. My last trip to India was my 60th trip since 1993. So I do this on and on. I go back in December. I go back in January. In February, I'll be in another. That's not a guilt trip on anybody. That's on me. But when she was asked this question at a forum we were doing, where we were both doing Q&A in a church, someone said, do you ever get afraid saying goodbye? She said, I've been afraid since the first trip he took. But she said, I live by the faith that when a man of God is doing the work of God, he is immortal till God calls him home. Folks, I would not want anybody's wife to live with that fear every day. But that's what fellowship is. Freedom is level 5, which is none of us will get there. Freedom is when you don't care what you say because you speak the truth. All of us hold back a little bit for fear. But freedom is Billy Graham speaking, and the guy says, you're a hypocrite. You're going to talk about your Lord coming in on a donkey, and you came in on a luxury liner. And Billy Graham said, you find me a donkey that'll cross the Atlantic, and I'll take it. Okay? So it's just it's a different genre. But I want you to internalize and personalize this. I got the first 3 from Dr. Adrian Rogers. I added the last 2 on my own. This is good stuff, folks. If you just plant this at the back of your head and ask yourself why some things are not working, see if you're in level 3 or level 4, if you're feeling fellowship. All right? Let's do this. Let me just pause for a second. Open it up for questions. If you have a question, they'll bring you a microphone. If you have a comment, if you have a long statement, talk to Tom. He'll give you your own seminar. You are the Q, I am the A, okay? So, all right. Anybody? Anything you always wanted to ask some dude from India? Really? No questions? No, made everything perfectly vague? Yeah.
Okay, I'll break the ice. What is an effective conversation we can have with the hypersensitivity, extreme political correctness in our society? What's an effective way to live, to speak, to share?
It depends on which people group, and that's very interesting to understand, because I do not accept political correctness just in a broad-based way. For example, there is a popular notion out there that, I'll just use me as an example, that the current political climate is anti-immigrant. I'm an immigrant. I don't go to bed worried that someone's going to chase me out. That's an erroneous perception. So when I'm asked a question or whatever it is, there's a beautiful book out there. You can get it on Amazon. It's called QBQ. It's called Question Behind the Question. It may not be for the hypersensitivity, but first thing you have to ask is, what is the real question? So in a dialogue with people, I always start by asking questions about what their primary assumptions are. So if someone says, well, everybody, the popular word right now is, well, everybody's prejudiced. Well, that is a fact. The very word says prejudice in the dictionary means a preference for. I'm prejudiced towards my wife over everybody else's wife. And I'm pretty sure other married people are very glad that I have that prejudice towards my wife. So the word has been hijacked. So it's very important to understand the question behind the question. How do you get that? There are two tonalities which are important. One is what we call meta-language, paralanguage, and meta-message. So I always try to find out the real intent behind the question. So when I was asked an immigrant question in Phoenix at a border town, I asked a reverse question saying, are you asking my opinion based on the fact that you've got something personally vested in the outcome of the law, or you want me to address it as someone who has been through the process? Totally different answer in terms of expectation. So hypersensitivity is actually catered to perception when it should be answered based on expectation. Do you really want a solution, or you just want to know where I stand? So once you begin with that premise, be aware of the law. For example, I really don't care what a person's position is if they say it's legal. I tell people some things are legal that in my worldview are not moral. And just because it's legal doesn't mean I'm going to give you a pass on it. I will still judge you morally. I cannot condemn you because legally you're allowed to do it. For example, right now in the hypersensitivity, what's the biggest thing today? Football, with all the kneeling and all. In fact, I was joking with Tom the other day. I saw a meme that came up saying in the city of Chicago now they've decided to make the national anthem on the police sirens. So that nobody would run, everybody will stop. So whatever the reason is, it's just a joke, right? But I called a soldier friend of mine and I said, what do you think about what's going on with this national anthem protest? See, the protest is real, their feeling is real. The venue may be wrong, that may be the issue. Okay, there is evil in society and people have a right to protest it. But I called a soldier who is the one we supposedly are all saying they're blaspheming. See, all of us who sit down on our couch in the house during the national anthem, how many of you are standing in your living room when it comes on? Most of us are sitting in our living room and we're saying, hey, you're defaming the soldier who's fighting. So I called a soldier. This guy has done 5 tours of duty. He signed up on 9/11. His name is Brooks Julius. I said, what would you do? He said, I will take a bullet so they can take a knee. Legally, they're right. Where is our issue? Morally, it's reprehensible, is what we're saying. That's the issue. So when someone's fighting for their legal right and you're arguing from a moral point of view, is always going to be a clash. So ask yourself, make sure you're on the same side. Watch me carefully. It's easier to stand side by side looking in the same direction than across in adversarial position. So I always ask people, before I answer, please explain to me whether you're looking for a solution or you're just looking for my opinion based on the emotion, because my answer would be radically different. All right? You had your mic.
As a new and young mentor of Zig Ziglar, what would you say was the advice or inspiration that propelled you the most?
It's a question I'm asked the most. I'm asked in every forum. And the question behind the question is actually, what is it about Zig Ziglar that made him so unique? I would venture to guess, and I would not be in error, he was the most consistent man I ever met. If the dictionary ever went pictorial, the word consistency would have to have the picture of Zig Ziglar. I remember when he was well into the memory was now going before the Alzheimer's diagnosis. He had fallen down some stairs, had balance issues. And so I was holding him and walking him to the car. As I was walking him to the car, he paused. And he says, where's the redhead? I said, sir, she's already seated in. And he says, you mean I did not open the door for her? And I said, no, sir, I didn't. You know what he was asking? He says, the one thing I'm supposed to do is open the door for my wife, and now I can't do that because of this wretched illness. And literally, I saw the tear forming as he began to realize. When we were in Panama, I had gotten him a thing to open the locks at Miraflores Locks, and he actually opened the 2 locks and let 50 million gallons of water in a ship pass through 2 oceans. We'd gotten a chance to sail through the Panama Canal, something I negotiated. As we were standing on the balcony, he put his arm around me and he says, "Today would not have happened had you not believed in me more than I believed in myself. Thank you for your trust in me." Those two stories to illustrate a point. One is he was consistent in behavior and expectation. The other, he was consistent in praise. There was not a thing he did which was not consistent. Now, when you look back in hindsight, we lost him in 2012. We can reflect with all the chivalry and all that. But when I was going through it, it was like Groundhog Day. Every day is the same day. You know, it's like nothing changes. You become, well, how you doing? Are you doing good? Are you better than good? And you know, just like it just would be the... And that's when I realized he had become a caricature of himself. So that's one of the things I said, man, Lord, if I can ever be a consistent person, that if people see me today and see me 15 years later, they say, hey, man, you're the same. That would be a great virtue to have. We keep changing with the tides of time. He never changed once in all the years I knew him. So. Anybody else? How about the remedial group? I'm just kidding. Lighten up. Good Lord. Oh, seriously, you turn. Anything you want me to clarify on what I said? I know I go a mile a minute, but covered a lot of turf. How many of you think I've got a little more material if you don't ask questions? Okay, I've spent my entire life doing this, but if you have, okay, so if not, I have some product back there, which is just they asked me to bring it last time I didn't, someone did, but we've got some CDs there, some books, it's just a whole amalgamation of stuff. You can read about it. There's a DVD there called One Nation Under God Again. It's my patriotic rendition where I bring scripture into it. My book, Abstracts to Absolutes, my book, Hard-Headed, Soft-Hearted, American Dream from an Indian Heart. There are 2 gold-setting CDs on there. There's one special CD on there which I recorded right after 9/11. It's called An Immigrant's Attitude, Grateful for a Nation's Generosity. So we combine them all there. I think they sell for about $149. One thing I'm going to offer you guys, I've never done it before, and Aaron's going to help me with the technology that comes with it. That's why he's going to watch. Depending on the number of you that ask for it, I'm going to do a conference call once a quarter for the next year as part of that package, all right? Which means we can jump on this call. If something comes up, triggers a mind, Shelley from my office will reach out to you. Whether it's 1, whether it's 10, we'll do it. I'll make that commitment. But I think what happens after events like this is, today's headlines are blotted out by tomorrow's traffic jams. We forget, life happens. So we want to give you a chance to be connected. Go ahead, sir.
I'm almost hesitant to ask this, but whatever. My sense is that your immigrant experience is unique to your success, and yet there are so many people that I see playing the victim card that have lived here for generations. What is an effective way to help those here out of where they're at?
Yeah, the victim card is an interesting thing. It's okay to be a victim, but on the day of productivity, refuse to participate in the process known as victimization. Here's the thing. Statistics bear this out, and if we had time, I will share them with you. People, the happiness index, for example, the happiest place in the world was revealed as the country of Bhutan, which is in the northeastern part of India. It borders India on the northeastern part, the foothills of the mountains there. If you went to Bhutan, there is nothing there, but they're happy. So culture has to play a part for it. One of the things we have done as a great disservice is we have allowed a narrative to go unchecked for what I call a biblical generation. America's cultural soul came home in a body bag after Vietnam. When the free love movement began, we lost, and Ravi Zacharias gives it. So why did we arrive at this victimization? There were 3 fundamental shifts in society. First came secularization. Secularization said that we are a secular people. We cannot rely on a moral authority of any single person or any single process. So when secularization came into the process, people lost their sense. Ravi says secularization is the process by which religious institutions, ideas, and encounters lost their social significance. So whatever it was, when the moment we jettisoned morality out, secularization came in the middle 70s. Secularization said we cannot have one way of thinking, everything should be allowed. On the heels of secularization came pluralization. With secularization, you lose your sense of identity. With pluralization, you lose your sense of shame. Because if everything goes, anything goes. When anything goes, what happened is, as Steve Turner put in his creed, when you hear the sound of whites go looting, bomb blast school, it's the sound of man worshiping his maker. Humanism reared its ugly head. Postmodernism came into the environment. So first secularization, everything goes. Then came pluralization, anything goes. On its heels came privatization. Privatization means I'm going to retreat to suburbia, I'm going to raise my fences, and I'm going to raise my children, and I'm going to have a moral code that's going to be unique for my family. When we send them out in public, now we send out 500 kids with 500 opinions and 500. Why is that thread important? Because man was never designed to live for isolation. We were always designed to live for community. So when these three shifts took place, victimization became a private hell, and they had nowhere to go except to other victims. So it became an identity issue that the only person who would understand me is the person who's as miserable as me. See, when one person who has a problem goes to another person who has a problem, now you have two people with the same problem singing Kumbaya, no solution. And that's what happens. We were never designed to be isolated. We were designed to participate. And so these three shifts forced people to now move into their. So when I was in California last week, I was with a company. This guy is a first-generation migrant from Mexico. He showed me the house he grew up in, where you can see the floor. He now runs a 100-employee company called Power Pro Plumbing. Raul is his name. Very successful. He proudly told me he has the second largest house in Yorba Linda. This guy has lived the dream. But a large percentage of the people that he says that he encounters during the course of his business consider him an anomaly. Why? Because they are with the same group day in, day out, not wanting to cross the divide. So victimization is a very interesting process, but we have to reach down and pull them up. But how do you do that? You do it by the way of how Zig Ziglar taught me to do it. He says, every time I raise you, I'm going to raise your foundation. So if you fall, you go back to where we were. So you can learn something. So that stepped approach. Now let me culminate that illustration with this. When you go through that victimization process, I'll give you a humorous story. When we were buying our first house, this was, we were in the process of building, or we had saved enough money. We landed in America, no clue. We made a decision, since we didn't go to school here, within 4 years of living here, we needed to own a home. That was our little goal. We lived in rundown neighborhoods. Anila was laid off when she came to India to get married to me. When I landed in America, she was laid off from her job. We got the call when we were in New York. I had like $10 to my name, $9. We landed in Dallas. She receives an unemployment, a severance check of $280. We'd got another 200 or so from people in the US who had sent some cash for the wedding. This is 1986. She doesn't have a job. She's just brought a new husband to the US. I don't have an issue. I mean, I'm still struggling with my image of talking to people. This is how we began. So she says, come with me. We have to go to the unemployment office. I said, what's the unemployment office? She says, oh, in America, when you're working, they take money out of your check. So when you're not working, they give you some of that money back so that you just have enough food on the table so you can find another job. Look how she positioned it to me. I had no idea what it was. She didn't say it's something you live on. She says it's just something they give you so you can find another job and you won't perish. What did that create? In me, an urgency to start doing something. Now, here's the interesting part. Today, that same unemployment insurance component is 90 weeks, which means for 2 whole years, you don't need to really look. When I was coming through the process, it was less than 8 weeks or 9, whatever it was. It was minimum wage was $3.35 an hour when I landed in America in 1986, and I had a minimum wage job. Because of the way she messaged me how this country takes care of you when you're working, I wanted to work. So I went for my first interview, minimum wage job. He says, by law, you're going to be required to work 40 hours a week. I said, can I work 70? He says, why would you work 70? I said, I'm from India. We're good at math and spelling bee. Of course, the Koreans got that now, but we're good at math. So he says, why would you want to work 70? I said, 70 times 335 is more than 40 times 335. That's how my dad raised me. This man looked at me and he says, are you a communist? I said, no, Methodist. But what's that got to do with anything? But then he said this statement. He says, you are naive enough not to be ignorant. Did you hear what I said? Naive enough not. See, naivete gives you innocence. Innocence gives you wonder. He says, you have wonder in you, the country will be kind to you. Before I knew what the systems and safeguards were, I'd already made it. We've never looked back then. When we come to the end of our financial rope, we tie a knot and hang on. We believe in self-sufficiency because we came through those ranks. Now, reason I share that story is I don't want to stand on some bully pulpit just because I live in suburban Dallas now and drive a nice car and take exotic trips and get to sit in the front of the plane. That came with a price. The price was what? When Anila quit to stay home and work and stay home and raise Nicholas, she was making more money than me. But she looked me in the eye and says, I want to be a mommy. She could have easily looked and said, hey, we have a good lifestyle. In fact, I wanted her to continue working. I had gotten used to that lifestyle. It was easy for me. Actually, folks, I'm ashamed to tell you this. There was a period in my life where I drove to my wife's work because I didn't have very much going on in my own, picked up her check and took it to the bank, and then shamelessly went to the Cowboy football games because her company gave us tickets. And I did all of that, okay? I'm standing in front of you saying I did that. It was an easy way. But when she looked into my eyes and said, I want to be a mommy and you need to be a daddy. It's not about money. We need to raise this child right. I made her a promise. For 3 years, I ate bologna sandwiches for lunch. I never went anywhere. We saved our money. And I made a promise to her. I said, one day I'll start my own company. And I did. It's a very small company. We're just the 2 employees. But she's listed as the president of the company that bears my name. And on our payroll, she makes $1 more than me. Okay, it will work. But you have to understand that when that victimization thing component comes into rears its ugly head, we need to now provide solutions, not tell them that victimization is here for the next 800 years because someone messed up 400 years ago. That has nothing to do with now. How does that feed you? How does that feed you? It doesn't. So when I was buying our first house, the real estate agent kept saying, hey, you know what, let me take you to Garland, Texas. I said, what's in Garland, Texas? She says, oh, we can find something within your price range. I said, well, how much will I need to live there? The place I had originally said. She says, oh, there, 20, 30,000 more. Even more than that. For a nice starter home in your price range, live here. I said, no, something's off. Do I need to save for another year? She says, no, let me show you. Then I said, no, tell me really why you keep taking me to this place, Garland. She says, oh, there are a lot of migrant communities here. I just thought you'd fit in. Now, here's the thing. This girl was not prejudiced if I had spotted her the P, the J, and the E in the word. Okay? She was not smart enough. She just thought that that's where I belong because it was easier for her. I remember looking at her, and I was not as refined as I supposedly am now. I said, ma'am, if I wanted to open my window and see Indian dudes, I'd have stayed in India. When I open my window, I want to see a white dude mowing his yard with a Cadillac in the driveway so I have something to aspire to. I don't know if I meant it then, but that's what my thought process was because of the early illustrations. Hear me carefully. Every idea you have about right and wrong that is birthed out of tradition and culture, every idea you have about what is right and wrong that is birthed out of tradition and culture will become the habits that you tend to form. These habits collectively become the behavior you exhibit. The behavior you exhibit reveals the character. Your character shapes your destiny. The very way you think based on tradition alters the outcome. Does that mean some traditions are good? Absolutely. Are some traditions horrible? Yeah. A lot of people can't explain them. My mother used to give me a coconut in India to take to the temple and break the coconut and give it to the high priest. And the high priest would pour the water over as an offering, keep half the coconut, and give me half to bring home. That was tradition. And I was a good son, so I dutifully obeyed. Well, one day into my life came a friend who liked coconuts. So he looked at me and said, we're going to do this slightly different. As I already shared with you, I was a fat kid with low self-image, and he was a good friend, and I didn't want to lose the friend. I said, what's your solution? He said, I'm going to break the coconut. We're going to drink the water, which is the best part. Then I'm going to bless the coconut. We're going to eat half of it. You take the other half to your mom. I did that for 7 years. When I got married, I went back and told my mom, I said, Mom, remember the coconut episode? I never did that. My friend Vikram blessed it. She says, oh, that's why we've been having all this bad luck. She didn't even know. See, some traditions are just there. And you have to ask yourself, and I started with this, victimization is an assumption that there's no out. Victimization begins with an assumption that there is no out. Condoleezza Rice was told, and I've had the privilege of sharing a stage with her at an event, but Condoleezza Rice in Alabama, one of the most racist states at that time, where Dr. Martin Luther King's speech said what? I have a dream that one day the governor's lips that drip with nullification and interposition, that every little black boy and every little black girl will have the same opportunity as every, if you remember the speech. Well, Condoleezza Rice, a little black girl in Alabama whose father said, you may not be able to eat at the lunch counter at Woolworth because of the prevailing mood, but you could be president. She went on to become provost of Stanford with $1 billion budget and the first black female Secretary of State. Well, there was a period in American history where Dr. King's dream did come true. Civics, society, media won't tell you this. Ask me, I've seen it with my own eyes. Where every consulate and embassy of the United States around the world had two pictures. One was a white boy from Texas, George Bush. Another was a little black girl from Alabama, Condoleezza Rice. His dream came true. He didn't say, I have a plan. That's why he said, I have a dream. So it's an important thing to realize, where does victimization come from? Victimization comes from the assumption that there is no out. And someone has to give them the out. And if all we do is parlay it, it becomes a never-ending cesspool. We got another question? Yes, sir.
Right here.
Oh, now we're rolling since I'm running out of time. Yeah, go ahead.
My son-in-law is native Bahamian, and down there, I've tried to do business there, and it's everywhere, I've realized now.
Repeat the first part I didn't get.
Yes, my son-in-law is native Bahamian.
Bahamian, okay.
And when you go there and you try to do business, I'm the perceived rich white boy from America, and you go down there, and they see the dream, but they have a victimization called niggerism. And they'll say, my buddy's going to say, you can't do that. And this all pertains, I think. And then inside, okay, the little rich white boy, you're battling this, golly, I could manipulate this. So how do you go between the feeling and fellowship when and it doesn't matter where we are in America, because it's the same thing, and you're touching on every bit.
Sure.
How do we now, when we want to help people become and understand wealth building to those similar situations?
Well, there are two things. One is, it's a human obligation. When I asked Mr. Ziglar, why did you bet on a young kid from India when you had a stable of speakers? There were 12 in his speakers bureau. I was the only one who was not, quote unquote, white. The other 11 were. I said, why did you bet on me? He says two things. You displayed an ability that others didn't for me. He says, there was no job I gave you that was so big that you said, I can't do it, I'll fail. There was no job I gave you that was so small that you said, I'm overqualified, I'm not going to do it. You did each one because you wanted to serve me. So he says, I saw a hunger in you. But he says, there's a second thing. He said, my mama had a 6th grade education, and she raised me in Mississippi. My father died when I was 5 years old. My baby sister died the following Monday. We grew up with nothing. My mama took one handout from the church, and after that she had a garden and she raised us. But this was Mississippi. This was part of the burning South. She says, we were technically the right color, but we had nothing. So we were not part of the problem, but we saw it all around us. And my mother kept telling us, even with nothing, one day you'll stand in front of a colorblind God. One day you'll stand in front of a colorblind God. See, we have a moral obligation. Acts 17:26 says we are all one blood. So we cannot look at somebody based on the color of their skin or any of that issue. Now, in terms of wealth and trying to share people, and if they have that victim mentality or they have the thing that you're rich, and the issue is always The Bible has historically given us two things. It says, through parable taught he them, without parable he didn't. So we have to bring the story that matters and the story that connects. I'll go back to my Kenya example. With the people standing, they had, I don't know, if you buy a new jacket off the shelf, you buy a ready-made jacket, they have a small band on the sleeve, which is the maker's mark, which you're supposed to take off. But the guys in Kenya all have that. They don't know they have to take that off. When I did a foot washing ceremony, a guy was limping, and he says, will you pray for me? I thought he wanted me to pray about his foot. I said, are you hurt? He says, no, the size, the left shoe is 8 and the right shoe is 10, but that's the only matching pair I could get when the Goodwill container was open, so I grabbed whatever I could. So necessity. But as I was there, I began to realize something, that the only way I could connect with them was not telling them about how great they could be because of what I know. I had to connect to them by going back to say how privileged I was to be with them now, and that together we will go. So it is not, come to me, I have the wealth solution. It is standing this side saying, I know how you feel. I used to feel the same way. Here's what we found. Let's go together. And it's a different process. So,
I just missed a few of the acronym of the PRIDE.
okay. Personal responsibility instills in me a desire for excellence. Personal, P, responsibility, R, instills in me a desire, D, for excellence, E. All right. Personal responsibility instills in me a desire for excellence.
So I have this doctor in Kansas City that's Indian. I'm just kidding.
Oh, it's like, sounded like Gracine. I was looking there. What she was saying. Okay, go ahead.
So my question to you is, what's your next step?
My next step? The next step, believe it or not, is, like I said, I'm 55. I've been doing this now for 25 years. I've had great mentors, great heroes. Many of them have made me the repository for their stuff. So they have entrusted me with their life's work. So my next step is, A, making sure I'm a good caretaker of those legacies that were entrusted to me. But I also think that for whatever little time I have left in this last innings that I want to play, having traipsed around the world, I want to devote a little bit of my time to America and become a culture crusader here. Because think about it, I am the brown immigrant who came here with nothing. And technically, I'm the exact opposite of who should be saying what I say. And the reason I say that is not for anything. I've worked in the battered women's shelters when I felt that I felt guilty that people would end, that a coward would. And I remember walking in there and the women just running away because they're just afraid of all. I've done the prison ministry. I've done most of the things that are required to give me an understanding of what different strata of society operate within. I've been with the very poor in the slums of India. I've been in the very high-rich neighborhoods. My co-author, Rick Baluzzo, when he now sold the big house, but I remember when he picked me up and he took me, he said, Krish, this is the house I built as a result of my dreams. I said, which one? He said, all of it. It was the whole mountainside in Santa Rosa. The room he had given me had its own kitchen. Okay, I never belonged there. I said, Rick, what am I even doing in your inner circle? He says, you're the only one who calls and asks, how am I doing? Everybody else calls because of what I'm doing. I remember, here's a funny story, sidebar. I was in his Aston Martin in his garage one day just pretending I was James Bond, because that's the closest I'm going to get to a car like that, beautiful car. And I punched some buttons and I'm going vroom, vroom, and suddenly the garage door opens. And I thought, man, I'd messed up. And he pulls in his little Prius. So this guy has an Aston Martin driving a Prius. What a goof. So he pulls in his little Prius and he says, having fun. I said, dude, I'm so sorry. He said, it's only money. I said, yeah, but that's like a couple of $100,000 worth. This car costs more than my house. Tell me, were you having fun? I said, man, for the first time in my life, I felt like James Bond. He said, look on the dash. It said Daniel Craig. It was James Bond's car. He had just bought it at an auction. So I've seen it all, okay? I've been on the highs, I've been on the lows. But the one thing that I cannot look away from is looking into my son's eyes and his generation and saying, we inherited something great. and we totally screwed it up on our watch. I may not win this rest of the fight, but I promise you I'm going to go down fighting. So. All right, I'm going to stick around for a little bit. I think we got another minute. We got another half a question we can answer. Yes, go ahead, sir. Do I have a podcast? No, I don't. I do have a cast. I was just in a movie, but no. No. In fact, Aaron's traveling with me a little bit. Nicholas traveled last week. Both of this. Aaron comes from a technology background. My son's a mechanical engineer. So they're just trying to figure out what is the best way. See, my messaging is rapid fire. I cover a lot of ground. I don't know if you guys follow Ben Shapiro. I'm more like his model. It's just boom, boom, boom. And so if you get a chance to listen to a young conservative mind, Ben Shapiro is a good guy to be listening to. But we just need something unique for our time. So I'm trying to figure that out. Next week, I'm meeting with some folks who serve in the state legislature in Texas. Through all of these meetings and their observations of how I do it, because it has to be 20 minutes or less. So they'll have to tell me, hey, you're doing too many topics. So part of this is their evaluation of how can I be relevant? Because our generation will take my advice because they want to leave something behind. But I want whatever I do to be impactful for the country we leave it to and who we leave it to. So that's the reason why we haven't put anything in play, hopefully in the next 6 months. So, all right? Of all the groups, by far, you guys have been the most recent. So, all right.